So I'm Megan Lords with Bitcoin Not Bombs. I'm here at the Freedom Summit in Arizona with Patrick Byrne, the CEO of Overstock.com. He's a trailblazer in the Bitcoin world. He announced at the beginning of the year that Overstock would be taking Bitcoin in a few months, and then in 10 days put it together and made it happen.
So you've been paying attention.
I have been, absolutely. So this is very exciting. And he just did an excellent talk on classical liberalism and Bitcoin. So let's start with that. How did you, what was your introduction to libertarianism?
Well, it's funny, looking back at my college years in the early 80s, I just always knew that well, actually, there was the husband of a professor, the woman who taught me Chinese. Her husband is a libertarian from Texas, and he stopped me one night, just walking on the sidewalk and at college, and we started talking, and 4 hours went by, and we were still, as often happens with libertarians, I must point out, but I was always attuned. Whenever I read Milton Friedman or Heidegger, it just made so much sense, and they seemed to understand the world so much better than the Keynesian magic money tree side, who thinks that you can. There's just an obvious unreality built into their thinking in my book.
Absolutely. So when did you first learn about Bitcoin? What were your thoughts initially, and how does it relate to classical liberalism?
Well, I first learned about 2 or 3 years ago. There was a story in Fast Company or Wired, just a short little story about Bitcoin. And since I read that, I've kept on it, kept up on the movement, love it. I assumed that the federal government was going to stop it for the same reasons and I'm pleased that they didn't, but just as China and Russia and autocratic countries are going to stop it, I worried anyway that our federal government was going to try to stop it. They basically have green lighted it as far as I can tell. Maybe just because they can't find any law that they can claim they count on to stop it. So that was really just November. And so as soon as that happened, I started getting serious and following it more closely. And like I said, we got it live in January 8th or something. I think it fits into the classical liberalism movement because classical liberalism is really about limited government. And if you want to limit government, one of the things you have to do is you can't give government an unlimited money supply. And fiat money lets them have an unlimited money supply. You can't have limited government with that sort of power. So to me, the cause of sound money, be it gold-backed currency and now Bitcoin, is really part and parcel of the whole attempt to constrain government and to have more freedom. Now, there are people and good friends of mine from the left who would disagree with that, and their basic model is freedom comes from the government. And you get sort of freedom coupons from the government. If only we get more government, bigger government that can issue more freedom coupons, people will be more free. I think that's a completely inverted understanding of how the world works. And so if the battle is really, government, people tend to anthropomorphize government. They think of it as some entity or some person. Government's just us. Government doesn't have any wishes or ambitions of its own. Government, well, in a sense, maybe it does. But the game is really about, we're trying to find ways to cooperate, we humans, because as we cooperate, we create more of a surplus and such. What institutions allow us to cooperate to achieve the ends we want to achieve? Well, government's just one institution. There can be other institutions and there's nothing holy about it. There's nothing sacred. It's not some, as Oliver Wendell Holmes said, it's not some brooding omnipresence in the sky. It's just an institution that we created. And our allegiance, anyway, it's just an institution, and there are other institutions that could develop that are better designed. And when they come along, we should switch to them. And the government's always about creating competition and promoting competition. The Justice Department has a whole subdivision. I'm being facetious because the government's really all about, isn't about that at all. But they have an antitrust department in their Justice Department that goes after, that forces businesses to be more competitive. So they say, well, here's government's chance to walk the walk. They're going to find out what it's like to find competition for their management of the currency through Bitcoin.
So you've kind of butted heads with the government through this naked short selling controversy. Do you see them cracking down on Bitcoin, maybe reversing their position as it gets more widespread usage, or do you think they're still going to kind of stay backed off?
I think it's awful hard to imagine at this point. It's gotten so much press. It would be such an extraordinary black eye for them at this point to try to stop Bitcoin. I really think that their strategy may well be, well, either they're going to act very soon. They can't let there be several million people get Bitcoin accounts and then step in and say, well, we're going to outlaw all of them. There'll be, they are to some small degree answerable to the public. So what they, I think, will do is just hang back, just continue hanging back and trying to stay away from it. However, if they do that, this competitor is emerging. That is a competitor for money and hopefully will displace their monopoly on money.
Right. So you're taking Bitcoin at Overstock. What are some other ways you're implementing Bitcoin? You did mention briefly at the summit that you were maybe thinking about paying your employees in Bitcoin.
Well, maybe we'll institute a voluntary thing. I can force it down anyone's throat, but if somebody wants their bonus or something in Bitcoin, they can set up a Bitcoin account and we'll pay them. And even if they convert right away into dollars, the more people, the more economic agents we can get to tie into the Bitcoin system, then the more robust that system becomes for the day in case there are, I know there seem to be a lot of people at this summit who are pessimistic about the future of the dollar and the future of the U.S. Well, this lets us work ahead of time to create a nice, robust alternative. So you can put silver in your basement, guns, butter, everything like that. But Bitcoin for that day in case it comes. But in the meantime, by integrating into the Bitcoin economy, you can contribute towards creating that robust alternative.
And it seems like a lot of people who seem to be interested in Bitcoin are younger generations. How do you see Bitcoin benefiting them?
Well, the truth is, I think that, well, my first answer is the Gandhi answer. Be the change you want to see in the world. Well, if you really are unhappy about the things you're seeing, Bitcoin, just by shifting to Bitcoin, you're causing some of that change that you want to occur. But the truth is, I think that what's happened is, I assume your generation understands that we've ripped you off. We have ripped you off. It's so nice meeting people under 30 who get that point. This basically, the business model of the United States worked for about 150 years. And then about 80 years ago, people figured out, and Roosevelt opened the door to, by going and lobbying in Washington, you could get big payoffs. And those payoffs were written on other people's bank accounts. So the shipbuilders got a tariff against, or I'm sorry, the steel builders got a tariff against the outside world's steel. And that was, in a sense, they were taking wealth from the shipbuilders because they destroyed the U.S. shipbuilding industry. And so, but politics became, for 50 or 60 years, a game of writing checks on the bank account of other people. And that all really got figured out by the 1980s, and people figured out how to organize to stop it until I'm 51, we guys, folks my age and older, we all found one group that we can write checks on their bank account and they'll never stop us. They'll never organize to stop us. And that is because it's the group of future human beings. There's no way for future human beings to organize to stop us. And so what we've done for especially the last 35 years is just write checks on the bank account of the future. And whether you're talking about the environment or Social Security or Medicare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the whole business model of the United States, really and Western Europe, so the social welfare states became writing checks on the bank account of you. And I've been wondering when younger people are going to, in general in my life, and I was the same way, younger people, actually I wasn't this way, but younger people, especially in college and such, want, they seem to like more government. They think more government's going to make the world better. I'm wondering when they're going to wake up and understand, no, what that bigger government has done has transferred a huge amount of wealth from you to us before you even really got to vote, before you got to show up. I think Bitcoin can finally put some handcuffs on that whole process, but just to the extent that maybe it's a pipe dream, but that as more that there is a snowball effect, and as people start shifting to Bitcoin and more do, in a world where Bitcoin really was dominant, would be a world where governments could not run enormous deficits and essentially write checks on the bank account of folks like you and give the money to people like me.
And it seems like a way for us to kind of opt out of the current money system, which is based on all of these things that are just terrible, like fractional reserve banking and all these other problems.
That's a big deal. This isn't often the case that you get to check out of institutions you don't trust, but for all the distrust that's been shown to our financial system, nobody's really had it in our country. Nobody's really had a chance to check out. Now you've got a chance to just check out and not play their game.
Yeah, and I think the Occupy Wall Street movement kind of made a good point about this as far as the banks, ripping off a lot of people, and it was a generational thing, and I'm kind of hoping that maybe, and I have seen some of them waking up to Bitcoin, and hopefully more people will get involved that way, from the left and the right, because it doesn't really seem it's political, but not in a sense of left and right.
Exactly. It's basically pro-freedom versus anti-freedom.
Yes.
And I've often, it's funny, the people I get along with the most these days are the people who are thought of as being either on the right or on the left. And I get interviewed just as often now by sort of lefty radio programs, and I love it. I love that that's where, and that's what you would expect. The people who are checked out of the mainstream are the ones who are going to see it first.
So Bitcoin is a currency, but it's also a protocol. And the idea of the blockchain and some of the other projects being developed too in the crypto sphere, I guess you could say, kind of are bringing about new ideas of governance. So what are your views on that, on a blockchain regulated system of governance, or a decentralized, maybe not even governance isn't the right word for it, but organization of society?
Well, I'm a big fan of the peer-to-peer nature of Bitcoin. I think that because we take for granted all kinds of institutions that underlie our financial system. We just assume they're there and that they're working. The things that move the money around. Who really wants to learn about that, or the things, the systems by which shares of stock in the stock market get actually traded, the plumbing, so to speak, of the financial system. But we've taken for granted that that's there and it's working. In fact, that has come to be dominated by some central institutions that I think are not trustworthy for a variety of reasons. So the beautiful thing about Bitcoin is it's peer-to-peer. There are not central clearing institutions. If I'm right, and the argument I've been making for 10 years about our financial system is the central clearing institutions. And it's this really boring subject, the whole subject of clearing and settlement. The subject of how under the table in the financial system property rights really get traded. I think there's far more slop and far more dirt in that system than people understand. And if I'm right about that, then that just means it's all a bigger advantage for Bitcoin, because there are no central institutions that can be corrupted by elites.
All right. So last question, you're obviously in this for the long run. What are your future plans for Bitcoin and Overstock?
Well, interesting question. We anticipate that we're going to start, I'll give you the news. I've said this to a couple other journalists. I don't know if it's gotten out there yet, but we're going to start offering money back if you pay with Bitcoin. We have developers working through the night now, and in a matter of sometime 4 to 6 weeks, you'll start seeing us. So we'll start paying you if you pay in Bitcoin.
All right, well, that's all the more reason to spend your Bitcoin at Overstock.com. Definitely check that out, and you heard it here first. So this is Meghan with Bitcoin Not Bombs and Patrick Byrne of Overstock.com.
Thank you, Meghan.
Thank you.